Well, good evening, everybody. Solon, thank you very much indeed for the introduction, and I'm very honoured to be with you here tonight, and I'm very much, too, looking forward to seeing the film later on. As you've been told, my title is the Immigration Services Commissioner, which means absolutely nothing to anybody. Furthermore, the organisation I run, which is about 50 to 60 people, is called the Office of the Immigration Services Commissioner, which equally tells you nothing about what we do. But I hope later on in my short talk, I'll be able to come to some of the work that we actually do and how it affects the world of immigration. But I'd first like to start off with some few thoughts and observations about the world of migration and immigration generally. These are my personal views. They don't reflect the view of the government or anything like that, but I'm very happy to share them with you and discuss them with them afterwards if anyone has any questions. To start with, I'd like you to imagine that some outer planet has sent a visitor to Earth to observe how the countries of Earth are handling migration and immigration. And our visitor is going to look and see what people are doing, read what's written about migration and immigration in the press, listen to what politicians and the public are saying about it, and tap into those emotions that everyone is feeling about immigration. I think we'd all probably come to roughly the same conclusion that when that visitor went back to his home planet, his report might be something along the lines of, well, migration and immigration is one of the biggest political issues affecting every country on the earth. There's absolutely no agreement between countries as to what they should be doing about it. It gives rise to huge emotions amongst just about every strata of society, and it's probably the biggest single threat to the stability of life on Earth. Not a very encouraging picture, but I think one that we would probably, most of us, recognize. But what our visitor would not see, because he'd only been here for a very short time, was what's happened in the past. Because the issues of migration, of people moving from one place to another, and people seeking to settle in a new country through immigration, those are activities that are as old as the hills. And from the time that human beings emerged from the Rift Valley in Africa, we've had migration every single year. It's nothing new. And I was reading a book about the emergence of Persia early this morning. And in that book, there were all the descriptions of the migration, the immigration, the forced movement of people. And one could only say, we today are seeing things that have been happening and going on from the time that we as humans first came to this earth. So the first point is, the issues of migration and immigration that we experience today are not new. They've been with us for many, many thousands of years. Now, the causes of migration and immigration are many and various. Often it was to find food. Sometimes it was driven by famine and the need to move because crops were no longer available. Sometimes migration occurred because of wars and pestilences, plagues. There are many, many reasons as to why human beings have actually moved across the face of the planet. But history tells us, though, that many of those migrations had real positive benefits. That where there was an interaction of cultures, of language, a sharing of knowledge, a sharing of trade, there were real positive benefits to many, many societies. Sadly, though, on the other side of the coin, there were many, many migrations where the opposite was true. And if I remember correctly, the story of what happened when humans first populated Australia was one of the biggest devastations of the natural habitat of that country that has ever occurred. And one is also reminded of the time that the Europeans first visited South America and brought with them all the diseases and the pestilences that the natives were totally unable to deal with. So migration and immigration can be both positive and can be both negative. I think, though, in today's world, we've rather forgotten about the positive sides. And all too often, we're just reminded about the negative sides. But today's world, though, is slightly different. And I think there are three reasons that I see why migration and immigration issues at the moment are different. Firstly, we've got many, many separate migrations happening across the world at the same time. Probably many more separate migration paths are in operation now than have ever happened before. And so the volume of people who are trying to move around the world is greater than we've ever had before. Secondly, we have media reporting now and instant news and 24/7 and this insatiable desire that we all have to read the news, get out our smartphone, dial up the news, what's happened today. We're all looking for instant news. And of course the media, and I hope there are no media people here present tonight, but without wishing to insult them, they do like to go for the big stuff. And that normally means when things have gone wrong. And we have to accept that this whole atmosphere that we have about migration and immigration at the moment is driven very largely by what we read in the media constantly. And the third way in which I think things are slightly different is we're seeing now migration and immigration being used by countries to deliberately destabilize other countries. And I think this is a new factor of immigration. I was saying to one member of staff earlier, I live in Finland for much of my wife is Finnish, and I was there over the weekend. Now, here's a bit of useless information for you. Did you know that the Finns are the highest consumers of coffee per head in the entire world? There's a bit of useful information for the next pub quiz. And for a small country of only 5.5 million people and over 250,000 lakes, there's another useless fact. But the relevant fact is here, Finland, you wouldn't really think as having an immigration problem or an issue, but it does. It has a border of 1,800 kilometers with Russia, stretching from the Gulf of Finland right the way up to the Barents Sea in the Arctic. A border that is, for the most part, forest, snow, temperatures -20, -30 in the winter, with only 8, I think it is, crossing points. And about 2 years ago, the Russians quite deliberately started pushing groups of migrants to the border, forcing them across for Finland to accept, with the view, this is the view of the Finnish government, and I think it's backed up by a lot of evidence, the aim was to destabilize the population of Finland. And that's one example where immigration is now part of almost a hybrid warfare set of arrangements, and that brings it into a different category. Now, given everything I've said about it, immigration so far, it's no wonder that there's a huge sense of fear around the world. Fear in those who are migrating and wanting to immigrate, those who are having to receive them, fear within the politicians as to how do they cope with all this when there are so many different issues. Now, I'd just like to explore the origins of fear a little bit more, because I think there are two reasons why people are fearful. People are fearful if there's a direct threat to your life, your health, your way of life, your existence. That clearly gives rise to fear. There's another kind of fear, though, which is the fear that comes from a lack of knowledge, and when you are ignorant and you don't know the facts. And your brain is, if you like, a bit of a vacuum. Now, I remember from my physics, I think, nature hates a vacuum. And so when nature sees that our mind doesn't have the facts, it will fill them with facts. And it will fill them with whatever facts are available. And whatever readily available conspiracy theories or negative reporting from the media or whatever, they pile in and come into our brains and fill that vacuum. And I'd like to come back to this point in just a few minutes. But the immigration agenda is a vast one. It's an elephant. It's a huge agenda. And I remember one very learned management consultant saying at one point, don't try and eat the elephant in one go, you'll only get very, very severe indigestion. Segment it and carve it up into Ellie burgers, if you like, or things that you can digest and deal with. And the problem with the immigration agenda and migration agenda that we have at the moment is it's such a vast, and people are looking for magic solutions that will somehow solve it just like that. It won't happen. There is no silver bullet that will solve all the immigration, migration problems of the world. What we have to do is to take each part of that agenda and see what we can do about it. So what I'd like to do now is to spend the rest of this talk just telling you a little bit about one part of the immigration agenda that I'm very concerned with, which I think is absolutely critical to the whole immigration issue and the business of reducing fear, and how we can do it by tackling this ignorance and raising awareness and giving people appropriate knowledge. So I'm now coming back to what I, as an Immigration Services Commissioner, actually do. And the topic I want to talk about is immigration advice. The advice that any asylum seeker, any visa applicant, or anyone who's got a query about immigration needs in order to be better informed, to make an application, or whatever it is they want to do. Now, I'd just like to ask you to imagine that if you have a thriving immigration advice sector, where a good, reliable advice is readily available and that whoever wants it can get it at an affordable price easily, what the consequences of that are. It means that any application for a visa, any application for asylum is based on good advice. And when it goes into the Home Office, the chances are then it will be dealt with speedily, quickly, and hopefully with a positive result. By contrast, if your immigration advice sector is not thriving, cannot provide you with good advice readily, what happens? Applications that go into the Home Office are then based on poor advice, inaccurate advice, and in the worst cases, based on no advice at all, and supported by certificates that have no validity whatsoever. What happens then? The application is rejected by the Home Office, one gets into legal challenges and debates, and I'm sure some of you have been involved in some of these at some stage of your career, and the whole system clogs up. Good advice is absolutely essential. I say it's a gateway into the immigration system. If you have a thriving advice sector, the benefits for everybody, both those in the Home Office and for applicants and those seeking advice, are huge. Well, that's the theory at any rate, but what happens in practice? In this country, I think the immigration advice sector has been a Cinderella. Cinderella, oh, she's over there in the corner, ignore her, don't really, she does a little bit of work, but we're not really interested in her. And when I joined as the Immigration Services Commissioner 5 years ago, that was certainly the case in terms of the part of the organisation that I run. I know we have a solicitor in the audience. I'd be very interested to hear his views about how well he feels the immigration advice sector is represented. I feel it's not. And no one in the public knows anything about us. They don't know how to get immigration advice. I'll come back to this point in a minute. So, who provides immigration advice? Well, it would be fascinating to go and just out into the streets of Uxbridge and ask 20 people, where do you get immigration advice from, and hear what they say. I suspect some of them would say, oh, we'll go to a lawyer or something like that. But I suspect the vast majority of them don't know. And here we have one example of ignorance, which is a cause of fear. Ignorance about how do you go and get advice about an immigration matter. Now, in 1999, the Immigration Act was passed, which made it absolutely compulsory for anyone who gives advice about immigration, they must be registered and regulated. You cannot just be anybody giving advice on immigration matters. You must be registered and regulated, and if you are not, you are breaking the law, and it is a criminal act. Again, that fact is probably not widely known in the general public at all. Now, there are 5 groups of people who provide advice. There are solicitors, and these range from specialist firms who do it most of the time, and I'm sure my friend there will back me up on this. And equally, there are many solicitors for whom they may only give immigration advice once, fairly rarely, depending upon who walks through the door. But solicitors are one group of people who provide immigration advice. Barristers are a second group, but they tend to be very highly specialized, depending what niche of immigration law they're working in. A third group is legal executives. And they are all regulated by their own regulator. And then we have the fourth group, called an immigration advisor. Again, the public have no idea, by and large, about immigration advisors. Now, immigration advisors, and there are 4,000 of them across the United Kingdom, these are not solicitors, they're not barristers, but they are people who have trained themselves and have proven themselves to be competent and knowledgeable about immigration law, and they are registered and regulated by the organization I run. We make sure that they are competent to join our register. We check their standards of work very regularly. We ensure that they are meeting the standards and providing good quality advice. And we have about 4,000 of them. And here's another fact that is not known. 50% of them do not charge 1 penny for their services. So that's 2,000 immigration advisors across the country providing immigration advice to whoever needs it free of charge. Is that fact known among the general public? Absolutely not. I said there were 5 groups. There is a 5th group, unfortunately. And the 5th group are the people who break the law, who provide bogus advice, and often will take very large sums of money and extort it from vulnerable migrants, vulnerable people who don't know any better. And unfortunately, we believe they are rife. And there are many, many of them in this country. And they are quite difficult to track down. And as soon as you track them down and put them out of business, they go underground, disappear from Uxbridge, and reappear in Birmingham. Track down in Birmingham, disappear in Birmingham, and then reappear abroad or in Leeds. There are some very, very capable people who are operating illegally, and it's one of the biggest banes of the immigration advice sector at the moment. And these people, when they charge these large sums of money, give very bad advice, certificates which are worthless. What happens to any application? It gets rejected by the Home Office, and the poor individual is worse off all the way through. So, where do I come into all this? Where does the Immigration Services Commissioner and the Office of the Immigration Services Commission? We were established in 1999 by the Immigration Act, and my job is to promote best practice in immigration advice across the United Kingdom. Just a fairly small remit, promote best practice. It's a huge remit, to be quite honest. But in essence, what we do as an organization is we are a regulator. We regulate that group of people called the immigration advisors, the 4,000 who are doing it, most of them full-time, every day of the week. And when I joined as commissioner back in 2019, the office was doing a good job, but it focused entirely on the immigration advisors. And when I went in and said, how much do we know about the people who are asking for advice? How much do we know about migrants? How much do we know about advice seekers? What their needs are, how we can best meet their needs? And the answer was, we don't really know anything at all. So one of the things I have done in the last 5 years is we've shifted the entire focus of the organization's work to put the advice seeker at the heart of what we do. Yes, we still regulate, but we regulate in a way that benefits the advice seeker, rather than just purely focusing on the immigration advisors. And we have a vision now, and our vision is that everybody who wants immigration advice is able to access it, and to access good quality, reliable advice as and when and where they need it. Now, all visions are very visionary, and reality may be a long way off from the vision. We're a long way off from that vision. In just one aspect, we don't have enough immigration advisors or anything like enough immigration advisors to meet the demand that's actually out there at the moment. But that is our vision, and we do it through 3 things. We regulate, so we check the standards of all those immigration advisors and make sure that they are providing quality advice. We disrupt the illegal activities. If we get any intelligence that someone is acting illegally and providing advice when they shouldn't be, I have a group of investigators who will go out, investigate, and we will disrupt it. And the aim is to stop it. Take it down, stop it happening, and if necessary, and if we think it's appropriate, we'll pursue it to a prosecution, and we will prosecute in the courts, and we do. And we have a pretty good track record of those we prosecute getting fined or prison sentences. So we are very serious on that disruption side, because it's a vital activity to protect advice seekers from the sharks that are out there. And it also protects the integrity of the immigration system as a whole if we can take out as many of these people who are trying to subvert the immigration laws and rules of the country. The third way we do, as well as regulating and disrupt, is we are now trying to develop the immigration advice sector, to try to bring it from its Cinderella role, sitting out there unloved, unwanted, and try and bring it center stage. And when I met Minister Malhotra, the new Minister for Lawful Migration, only a few weeks ago, my plea to her was, Minister, please can you bring immigration advice? Can you be the fairy godmother who brings Cinderella in and makes her the star of the ball? And make immigration advice absolutely mainstream to immigration activities within this country. However, regulation, disruption, developing the sector, that's not my biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is how do we raise awareness amongst advice seekers, communities, faith groups, all those who are likely to come into contact with an asylum seeker or a refugee or someone making a visa application. How do we fill all those knowledge gaps in the areas that I've mentioned? That's the big challenge I face. How do we reach out to communities to say, this is how you can access an immigration advisor, and this one's free of charge? How can we say, be careful of someone who claims to be an immigration lawyer but actually may not be anything of the kind? How can you check it out? If we can just give facts to people, basic, simple facts, we will raise people's awareness about how they can get advice, how they can avoid bad advice, and how the immigration system can work positively for both them as an advice seeker and someone who's putting in an application, and work positively for the country as it is. So that's my big challenge. And it's being able to speak to groups like you here tonight that I can start, hopefully, getting that message across, and hopefully that you will spread that message as well. So in summary then, I think we should remember that migration and immigration as a human activity is as old as the hills. It's not something new. We've been doing it ever since we first emerged. Fear is rife. There's a lot of use of the phrase a toxic environment. And I think I see this as well, that everything about immigration at the moment seems to be negative. And even if there's a bit of good news about immigration, somebody will twist it and turn it into something that's negative. So it's a toxic, horrible, febrile environment at the moment in which fear does play a huge, huge part. But I think this film is such an important way of starting to expose that fear and help people to understand that fear. And in the area I work, my aim is to raise awareness, raise knowledge. And by giving people knowledge, simple knowledge, which is easy to understand, then hopefully we will get to a more positive environment within the immigration world. That's all I've got to say. Thank you very much indeed.